She wasn't looking for a victim. She was looking for a friend. That's exactly why 85-year-old Beverly Crane trusted Judith Harlow the moment they met. They laughed together, shared meals together, and slowly, Judith became the one person Beverly trusted more than her own family. Then, everything changed. A new will, a missing inheritance, and $3.8 million transferred to the woman everyone believed was simply another lonely senior. But when the trial began, prosecutors uncovered a pattern far more disturbing than anyone imagined. This wasn't friendship. It was an organized family operation that had already destroyed multiple elderly lives. Stay with us until the very end, because today's story proves that the cruelest betrayals don't always come from the people we fear. Sometimes they come from the people who seem to need our friendship the most. Beverly Crane was 85 years old and had spent her adult life in Seattle, Washington, where she had worked as a pediatric nurse for 31 years before retiring in 2004. She had raised her son, Thomas, alone after her husband passed in 1989, and had done so with the kind of steady, quiet determination that Thomas would later describe to the court as the defining quality of everything she was. Her estate, built carefully over 6 decades of disciplined saving and modest but consistent investment, was valued at $3.8 million. Her home in a neighborhood she had lived in for 40 years, 2 investment accounts, and a retirement portfolio that had never been touched unnecessarily. Thomas, 49, managed her care with the same consistency Beverly had once brought to her patients. He visited multiple times a week, handled her financial correspondence, accompanied her to medical appointments, and maintained the kind of close relationship with his mother that both of them had always taken for granted. Beverly was sharp, socially engaged, and deeply independent in spirit, even as her physical mobility had begun to slow. She attended a senior community center 3 mornings a week, where she had made friends she genuinely looked forward to seeing. Judith Harlow was 68 years old and had begun attending the same community center in the spring of 2021. She was warm, attentive, and had a particular gift for finding the things that mattered to each person she spoke with and returning to them in every subsequent conversation. Beverly enjoyed her company immediately. Judith remembered that Beverly had mentioned her late husband's name once and asked about him in every conversation afterward. She brought Beverly small things, a book she had mentioned wanting to read, a variety of tea she had said she enjoyed. She laughed at Beverly's stories and told ones of her own that Beverly found genuinely engaging. Thomas met Judith twice during early visits and found nothing concerning about the friendship. His mother was happy. The center was a positive part of her routine. He had no reason to examine it more closely. What Thomas did not know was that Judith's son, a man named Craig Harlow, 44, had been operating a systematic elder fraud scheme for nearly 7 years. Craig had identified senior community centers and church groups as ideal environments for identifying wealthy, socially active elderly individuals who lived alone or had limited daily family contact. Craig coached his mother carefully in the techniques of relationship building, the specific questions to ask, the details to remember, the pace at which to deepen trust without triggering alarm. Judith was not an unwilling participant. She received a structured share of every estate they successfully redirected. By the summer of 2021, Judith had become the most consistent presence in Beverly's daily social life. She began offering to drive Beverly to appointments when Thomas was unavailable. She accompanied Beverly on errands. She spent long afternoons at Beverly's home, during which she introduced the same kinds of carefully constructed narratives Craig had developed for previous targets. She mentioned casually and repeatedly that she had noticed Thomas seemed stressed when he visited and had wondered out loud whether managing his mother's affairs had become a burden he was struggling to carry gracefully. She suggested gently that children sometimes had complicated feelings about aging parents that they did not always express honestly. Beverly was not a woman who was easily moved by indirect suggestion, but she was a woman who had been told these things consistently by someone she trusted over a period of months during which that person had made her feel more genuinely attended to than almost anyone in her life. By late 2021, Beverly's conversations with Thomas had become slightly more guarded. She asked him once whether he had spoken to anyone about her finances. He told her he had not and asked her where she had heard that. She said she could not remember. In January of 2022, Craig Harlow arranged for a document preparation service and a mobile notary to visit Beverly's home on a Wednesday afternoon while Thomas was at work. Judith accompanied Beverly during the signing, presenting the documents as an estate planning update she had researched on Beverly's behalf. The will revision directed Beverly's entire estate to Judith. She signed it. No independent attorney was present. Thomas was not contacted. Craig had selected the document preparation service carefully. It was a low-cost online provider that did not require attorney review and asked no questions about the signatory's capacity or the circumstances of the signing. Beverly Crane passed away in June of 2022. Craig filed the will within 10 days. Thomas discovered the document when the estate attorney's office contacted him. He read it twice and then sat in his car in the parking garage for 30 minutes before he could make a phone call. He retained attorney Sandra Kim, a probate and elder fraud specialist in Seattle with 20 years of experience. Sandra began investigating Judith's background immediately and made a discovery within the first week that reframed the entire case. Judith Harlow and her son Craig had been connected to 2 previous estate disputes in Oregon and California. In both cases, an elderly person had revised their will in Judith's favor following a period of intensive friendship at a senior community center. In both cases, the families had challenged the will but had been unable to obtain sufficient evidence to proceed. Craig had ensured both situations resolved without full investigation. Sandra contacted both families and obtained their complete case documentation. The similarities across all 3 situations were precise. The same type of venue, the same relationship-building timeline, the same gradual isolation from family, the same low-cost document preparation service, the same pattern of notarization without independent review. Sandra brought her findings to the King County District Attorney, which opened a criminal investigation that expanded rapidly once investigators began tracing Craig's financial records. They found structured payments from prior estate proceeds directed to accounts Craig controlled, a travel pattern showing visits to Oregon and California during the periods of the previous disputes, and communication records between Craig and Judith that documented specific coaching instructions Craig had provided before each stage of the relationship with Beverly. The hearing was held before the Honorable Judge Patricia Moore at the King County Superior Court. Sandra Kim presented Beverly's medical records showing cognitive vulnerability in her final year, the testimony of 3 community center staff members who had observed the evolution of Beverly's friendship with Judith and noted specific moments when Judith had steered Beverly away from conversations with other members, and the full documentation from the Oregon and California cases showing the identical pattern across 3 victims. She called an investigator from the King County District Attorney's Office who testified about Craig's financial records, the structured payment history, and the communication records documenting his coaching of Judith. Then she called one of the Oregon family's representatives who described in precise detail how the same sequence had unfolded with their father 3 years earlier. Judith's attorney argued Beverly had made a genuine choice to honor a friendship that had brought her real comfort in her final years.
Sandra Kim asked the court to consider what genuine friendship looked like when the same woman had followed the same sequence with 3 elderly individuals over 7 years, each time facilitated by a son who received a structured financial share of the result, and each time using a document preparation process specifically chosen because it asked no questions. Judge Patricia Moore ruled the will invalid, finding that Beverly had been subjected to a sustained and organized campaign of undue influence carried out by 2 individuals acting in deliberate coordination. She ordered the estate distributed to Thomas under Beverly's previous will and referred both Judith and Craig Harlow to the King County District Attorney for elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, and fraud. Craig Harlow was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 11 years in Washington State Prison, with the sentence reflecting the court's finding that his conduct had been premeditated, organized, and repeated across multiple victims. Judith Harlow was convicted as a co-conspirator and sentenced to 6 years. The 2 Oregon and California cases were reopened following the conviction. Both families received partial restitution through civil enforcement proceedings. Thomas Crane settled his mother's estate quietly over the following year. He continued attending the same senior community center his mother had loved, this time as a volunteer, helping coordinate transportation for members who could no longer drive. He said his mother had spent 31 years caring for other people's children. He figured the least he could do was spend a few hours each week making sure the people who had known her still had somewhere to go on Tuesday mornings. Beverly Crane had looked for friendship in her final years and had found what felt like the real thing. The court confirmed it was a performance, rehearsed and repeated, designed by a man who had turned his own mother into an instrument of harm. The sentence reflected everything that it cost 3 families across 3 states. Would you know how to protect an elderly parent from a friendship that might not be what it appears? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Court of Shadows for more courtroom drama stories every week.